What's good? It's Woog. I wanted to give some thoughts on David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade becoming official for November 25th in Las Vegas. This is David Benavidez's first fight defending that interim super-middleweight status after beating Caleb Plant in Benavidez's greatest career victory. Before that, I would say his best win was probably against Anthony Durrell. David Benavidez, keep in mind, is a former two-time 168-pound champion. He had lost both titles due to non-fight related reasons. Basically, he hasn't lost a fight. Same thing with Demetrius Andrade. I mean, Benavidez is 27-0 and Andrade is 32-0. And you know, Andrade, for all the reputation of not being a power puncher, so to speak, he's got nearly a 60% KO ratio, like a 59% KO ratio with 19 knockouts out of his 32 wins. So both fighters are undefeated. Demetrius Andrade has only had one fight at 168. And I just want to say I'm extremely happy that this fight was made. Whether or not it's too late for Demetrius Andrade, he's 35. He turns 36 in February. So he's closer to 36 than he is to having just turned 35. But when you look at Demetrius Andrade's career, the fact that he's been in the sport for so long and that he's a two-division champ. He was a champion at 154, defended it successfully a few times. He even won a share of the WBA belt at 154. So he's like a two-time 154-pound champion, and then he was a middleweight champion, defended that successfully a few times, but he has gone so many years, basically his entire career, without having a signature fight, a marquee opponent. I mean, I would say Vanes Martirosyan might be his best opponent throughout his career, and that was early in his 154 run. In fact, that fight was 10 years ago, and he was the first person to beat Vanes Martirosyan. Martirosyan down the line would lose to Jermell Charlo via decision. He would lose to Erislandy Lara via close decision, and then at the end of his career he went up and he fought Triple G when Triple G needed an opponent when Canelo tested positive for the PEDs and Martirosyan got knocked out early. But Martirosyan was always like a contender, just knocking on the door of a championship. So Demetrius Andrade had beaten him, but again, that was 10 years ago. And aside from that, what would his next best win be? Probably against Sulechki in one of Andrade's middleweight title defenses, or maybe against Willie Nelson in his 154-pound run. But all that to say, Demetrius Andrade, for as long a career as he's had and for being a two-division champion, has never competed against a champion nor a former champion. And I'm having trouble of thinking of another fighter who's gone that long a career, been undefeated, been a title holder, a multiple division title holder without a signature opponent. Help me out. If you could think of another fighter who's had as frustrating a fight-by-fight schedule opponent-wise as Demetrius Andrade. I'm really thinking hard about this one. I mean, Jermall Charlo has had a very frustrating middleweight run. I would say that his middleweight campaign has been as frustrating as Demetrius Andrade's middleweight campaign, but at 154, Jermall Charlo, fought Julian J. Rock Williams, for instance, or even, at middleweight, he fought Derevianchenko. I would argue that Derevianchenko might be a better fighter than Demetrius Andrade has fought throughout his career, which is crazy to think about. And maybe Jaime Munguia, like if he continues down the path of, he did just fight Derevianchenko in a blood and guts war, but before that, if you look at his career after making that splash, beating Saddam Ali, and you look at his fight-by-fight opponent schedule, yes, he did fight Liam Smith early in his 154-pound title run, but after that, Jaime Munguia's opponent-by-opponent schedule has been pretty embarrassing, really. But again, Demetrius Andrade is 35. We're talking about guys, in Jaime Munguia, who I believe is still in their late 20s. So he's got some time to fight fighters who can help you establish a legacy. And it's been frustrating because there were a couple times where a big fight was almost made. Like Demetrius Andrade had a fight with Jermell Charlo on the table. That was at 154. And, that one was to Demetrius Andrade culpability wise in terms of who's to blame for the fight fight not going down. But in a lot of other cases, it wasn't Demetrius Andrade's fault. He was campaigning for a fight with Triple G for years. He was campaigning for a fight with Billy Joe Saunders, and they almost made that fight happen. But Billy Joe Saunders tested positive for PED, so that fight fell apart. And then Billy Joe Saunders ended up going up to 168, fighting Martin Murray and eventually fighting Canelo Alvarez. So it's like he tests positive for PEDs and ends up having a huge opportunity on the other side of that positive PED testing, whereas Demetrius Andrade was back to being stuck and having trouble finding a relevant opponent. He was campaigning for a fight against Jermall Charlo at 160. Jermall Charlo had no interest in fighting him. Jaime Munguia was a mandatory for Demetrius Andrade's WBO middleweight title. No thanks. In a similar way to Ryan Garcia when Devin Haney was holding a share of the WBC lightweight title, and Ryan Garcia was still uninterested in fighting Devin Haney. So even with a belt, Demetrius Andrade couldn't reel in a significant opponent, which is just crazy and it's frustrating. And it's one of those things that is quote unquote broken in boxing. Like, that's Demetrius Andrade's career is one of the few that I would look at and say, man, if I could wave a wand and change boxing so you could change that career trajectory and that fight by fight career path, I would change that if I could. So yeah, it's been a disappointing run, and I don't think anybody would argue against the idea that Demetrius Andrade is arguably a Hall of Fame talent. You just have to compete with fighters who can basically certify that claim and put that stamp of approval on your abilities, on your career. I mean, Liam Williams, decent opponent. Jason Quigley, decent opponent. But yeah, it's not enough to really certify you. Very frustrating, but now he finally gets to fight a beast of an opponent. And this wasn't ideal for me when I was thinking who to match Demetrius Andrade up against, because I still in my mind envision Demetrius Andrade as being a very good middleweight, not a 168 guy. I mean, at least not yet. He hasn't proven that. Again, he's had one fight at 168, and it was against Damon Nicholson. That was the first guy to bring Edgar Berlanga the 10-round distance. Damon Nicholson, I think recently just got stopped against Christian Mbili. That was less than 2 months ago. He got knocked out in that fight. So Damon Nicholson being Demetrius Andrade's only 168-pound opponent and that fight going the distance, I don't think that's a great sign. And look, Demetrius Andrade won that fight, by a wide margin, but there's been this thing with Demetrius Andrade that we're going to get to in terms of how he's been fighting the second half of some of his fights in recent years. But with David Benavidez, again, a two-time WBC 168-pound champion, everybody or most boxing fans have been wanting to see him fight Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo Alvarez hasn't shown much interest in fighting David Benavidez. And people theorize that Canelo Alvarez was calculated in when he went to 168, and basically they're discrediting Canelo's run, which I'm not. I think that was phenomenal when he went up to 168 and fought Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant with Avni Yildirim in between the Callum Smith and the Billy Joe Saunders fight. I thought that was a historic run. I mean, he did it all like within a year and a half or something. I think it was less. I think it was closer to like 1 year where he did that and became undisputed at 168. And a lot of people say, well, he did it when David Benavidez wasn't a champion. Well, I'm saying there's no, who am I to say that Canelo Alvarez would not have done it if David Benavidez had not lost his title on the scale? Like, to me, that is circumstantial evidence. You know what I mean? It's not a relevant argument in my book. It's totally speculative, because if the goal was for Canelo to become undisputed and David Benavidez is one of those guys holding a belt that's in your way, look, you would still fight him just like you fought Callum Smith, who I thought was a dangerous opponent for Canelo Alvarez. When I first heard that fight was made, I'm like, whoa, Callum Smith is not Rocky Fielding. In fact, Callum Smith knocked Rocky Fielding out in the first round. So yeah, I thought that Callum Smith was going to be a handful for Canelo. It just turned out that he wasn't. But all that to say, most fight fans have been wanting David Benavidez because of what we've seen, even when, a few years ago when he was beating Anthony Dirrell. Stop Anthony Dirrell. I mean, largely due to the accumulation of damage and a bad cut to Dirrell, but he stopped Anthony Dirrell. And, in the campaign after that, when he stopped Romer Alexis Angulo, where he lost the belt on the scales before that fight, he stopped him in the 10th round. He knocked out Ronald Ellis in the 11th round, knocked out Kyron Davis in the 7th round. These aren't great opponents, but they're pretty decent to good, solid, decently solid opponents, I would say. But he's stopping them all. And then he fought David Lemieux, who really had no business at 168, but he's a hard hitter, and he just smoked David Lemieux. That ended up, I believe, being David Lemieux's final fight before retirement, knocked him out in the 3rd round. So it's like, we see that David Benavidez is clearly damn good. I mean, he's a handful. He's a big dude. And it's crazy because size-wise, we're going to get to that too. I've seen him listed as small as 6'1". Look, I saw him outside of that Carson Center. It was the day that Gervonta Davis fought Hugo Ruiz. He was supposed to fight Abner Mares, but Mares pulled out due to injury. Gervonta Davis fought Hugo Ruiz. I ended up going to that fight. I saw David Benavidez outside of the venue, and I'm like, yo, this guy is not 6'1". He looked every bit as like 6'2" on the low side, 6'3" on the higher side. But I often take, BoxRec and Wikipedia, height and weight stats, especially height stats and sometimes reach stats with a grain of salt. But it does at least give you a ballpark figure, where the people are stature wise. But David Benavidez, big dude, he hits hard, he's pretty quick, he's got a lot of volume, and I think that his defense is better than advertised. That to me is one of the missing components when people analyze David Benavidez. Look, he's not like one of these Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney style fighters where it's like hit and not get hit, and they are the sweetest of sweet scientists. That's not David Benavidez, but he works his defense in a way where it helps facilitate his offense. He gives you enough defense, gives you enough feints, gives you enough pressure, and so his game is tailored to spotlighting and making his skill set, his arsenal, effective. So he's looking to break you down with combinations. He's got power in both hands. He, again, throws pretty quickly, and he manages distance and range well enough to know when he needs to let his punches go. So David Benavidez finally secured another big, relevant opponent after that Anthony Dirrell win. Several fights down the road, he finally got Caleb Plant in the ring with him. And Caleb Plant was giving him some issues early, but David Benavidez ended up working Caleb Plant over to where Caleb Plant started to slow down in the second half, not too dissimilarly from the way that he slowed down against Canelo. Very different fight with different styles. Benavidez is not Canelo style-wise anywhere near him. Although, again, I desperately want to see them fight, but David Benavidez ended up breaking Caleb Plant down and really beating on him, and Caleb Plant was having to hold on for much of the final few rounds of the fight. After, again, Caleb Plant looked good in the first 5 rounds, I would say, he started to fall apart around, rounds 8, 9, to where he started getting beaten up and his defense just collapsed. I'm wondering, because of Demetrius Andrade's 35 years of age, where I stand right now, without doing a deeper dive, and I will issue out a full, a preview as we near the fight date. And if I have any, other fight thoughts, I'm going to issue a video or some content on that as well, including in our live chats. But right now, just gut instinct. First of all, I want to see them face off against each other. I want to see David Benavidez and Demetrius Andrade look eye to eye with each other. I want to see where they stand height wise. I suspect that Andrade might be about as tall as David Benavidez, but I just want to see where they stand, because if David Benavidez looks significantly bigger than Demetrius Andrade, then I'm really going to have to kind of reshape my thinking of this fight. But look, skill wise, when people hear about pressure fighter, they start to think a couple things. They think like Antonio Margarito. They think like Roman Villa, the guy who beat Rashidi Ellis and then lost to Boots Ennis. Look, David Benavidez is a pressure fighter, but he's not Roman Villa. It's not that type of style. I think that, again, David Benavidez is a better boxer than advertised, even if he's not that super defensive style of boxer that we start to view as the quintessential boxer. David Benavidez is a boxer puncher. And again, the skills and the boxing technique that he uses is used to further facilitate his offense. And it works for him. It worked for him against Anthony Durrell. It worked for him against Caleb Plant. Even if he drops a few of the early rounds against some of the sweeter scientists who are maybe a little bit better reflex, better movers, better jabbers, maybe a little bit quicker, maybe, but it ends up catching up with them when David Benavidez keeps that sustained pressure on and keeps on looking for opportunities to throw a lot of punches and a lot of combinations. So Demetrius Andrade, again, we'll see how they stack up height-wise, but Demetrius Andrade being 35, I just can't see that working well for him in the second half of the fight. Like, if you look at the way that he fought Liam Williams, he dropped Liam Williams like multiple times. I thought he was going to stop Liam Williams in that fight, but he started to slow down to where Liam Williams started to catch up with him, landed some big shots. A lot of people forget that. If you rewatch Andrade versus Liam Williams, Andrade, had me thinking, hey, are we okay? Are we okay here? Like, he ended up winning the fight again by wide margin, but he didn't look great in the last few rounds. And he looked like he was like really starting to run out of steam. He was slowing down. His movement wasn't as good. And the thing about even like some of the best fighters, best boxers, I'll say, is that when they start fatiguing, like their defense really starts to fall apart. Like we see this with good fighters who start to tire. All of a sudden, they're a lot easier to find in there. Their legs aren't moving as well, and their reflexes, their upper body movement isn't as good, isn't as sharp. And I'm just wondering, I just feel like the most likely scenario is that because of David Benavidez's, snowball effect, where he starts picking up steam and he starts seemingly moving downhill, that Demetrius Andrade could start to wane to where a lot of the things that were working well for Andrade, say he was able to kind of jab and move, and David Benavidez looked like he was, getting frustrated trying to catch up to Andrade, and Andrade also a southpaw, kind of giving David Benavidez these angles where he's able to line him up with some straight, left hands. And Demetrius Andrade is able to throw straight punches, and sometimes he can even throw some wild looking, maybe wild isn't the word, but they are looping punches at times, especially if he feels confident early in the fight. You saw that against Luke Keeler early in their fight. Demetrius, it ended up going like 9 rounds, and he ended up stopping Keeler in the 9th. But look at that first couple of rounds. Demetrius Andrade came out like a bat out of hell, throwing these like winging wide shots. And I'm like, damn, this isn't the same Demetrius Andrade that I've been seeing over the last few fights against like Alantez Fox and against Katadakwa. So Demetrius Andrade can change the trajectory and the strength, the power of his punches. So even if he has some early round success against Benavidez, it just seems like Demetrius Andrade at a point where if the idea was to hurt you or to maybe even stop you, and that didn't work within the first few rounds of him doing good work, then he starts to get on his back foot more and starts to kind of pepper you with shots where he's more so just kind of buying time and trying to run out the clock and win by decision at that point. Whereas Benavidez starts to pick up steam, and again, he seems like he's rolling downhill throughout the second half of the fight. If that starts to be the trend of this fight, then that's bad news for Demetrius Andrade. Then you're relegated to, one, is Demetrius Andrade going to be able to finish the fight? I tend to believe, at least in my early instincts, my early thoughts here, that he will be able to go the distance, even if he starts to get beaten up. But the fight that starts playing in my head a lot that I can't get away from is Erislandy Lara versus Jarrett Hurd. That was a title unification fight where you had a older boxer in Erislandy Lara, the sweet scientist of the two, and then you had the pressure fighter, the slugger, if you will, the less defensive, but the guy who starts to roll downhill. He's able and willing to absorb punches, at least in that stage of his career when he was still undefeated for a long time. Jarrett Hurd started to beat on Lara after Lara had early round success. And Lara, again, he was outfoxing Jarrett Hurd, but then started to get beat on more in the final few rounds. And then Jarrett Hurd ended up dropping Lara towards the end of the fight. and he secured a close decision win where you got the feeling if Lara was a couple years younger, maybe Lara would have had a little bit more of an engine. He would have had a little bit more in the tank to keep on executing that boxer, sweet scientist style against Hurd. And he was hitting Hurd. Like, he was hitting Hurd with some nice shots. But I feel like he could have done that for a slightly longer period of time to where it would have been Lara who wins the decision there. But as fate would have it, Jarrett Hurd just started to beat on Lara and ended up winning that. That's the fight that I keep on hearkening back to when I think about Benavidez versus Andrade, where it's like, yeah, I think Andrade's got the tools overall to pull it off against somebody the caliber of David Benavidez. And this is put up or shut up time. This is what Andrade's wanted his whole career, a big signature fight. I just wonder if Father Time is already kind of caught up to where he's going to be on the other end of the decision at 35. And it's like, I think that as Benavidez starts to pour it on, Andrade's legs are going to be what fails him, to where he starts spending more time with his back near or up against the ropes and then trying to move and then throwing fewer punches because he's trying to get out of harm's way. And it ends up being a bit of a struggle for Demetrius Andrade, where again, once his legs fail him, then everything else starts to go. Your reflexes, your upper body, you're not nearly as slick at that point. You're not able to make a miss and counter and then pivot and move and bring the fight back to the center of the ring. You don't have that anymore once your legs start to go. And I suspect that because of age and because of the pressure and the punishment that David Benavidez is going to be dishing out, that Demetrius Andrade is going to slow down significantly and is going to end up losing majority of those final few rounds. So then the question becomes, did he bank enough rounds in the first half of the fight? Like Caleb Plant didn't bank enough rounds to then collapse essentially and still win a decision. If Demetrius Andrade can bank enough rounds, then you might get a close or even controversial decision where people might see David Benavidez beating on Andrade, but let's say Andrade gets beat on but doesn't hit the canvas. So it's 10-9 rounds that David Benavidez starts to win, to where if the judges give Andrade enough of rounds 1 through 6 or rounds 1 through 7, maybe Benavidez could beat on Andrade late, but Andrade still secure a close decision win. But I just don't know if Demetrius Andrade still has enough to look good through rounds 5, 6, and 7, and then start to fade 8, 9, 10. I think that maybe at 35, it doesn't take Benavidez 7, 8 rounds to start catching up with Andrade, but maybe 5 to 6 rounds to start slowing Andrade down. And if that's the case, then Andrade's chances of winning a decision are decreased dramatically. But yeah, those are my early thoughts here. If I had to guess, if I had to just give my early instinct or instinctual prediction, I would go with David Benavidez, but not via stoppage. I would say Demetrius Andrade still shows enough craft, enough experience, enough, boxing IQ and boxing acumen to make it the distance, but not secure the win. Which, I mean, for the career of Demetrius Andrade, that would be unfortunate, where it's like, man, you've wanted, a big opponent your whole career. It just turned out that the monster of an opponent that you secured came at a time where you were at 35, you were up a division at 168, and you just didn't have what it took anymore to win that fight on that night. I just see that, unfortunately for Andrade, as being the most likely scenario. But check it out. If Andrade spoils the party for David Benavidez and ends up handing him his first loss and then gets another fight after that, but against Canelo, you might have a late career rally to where if you couple the multiple division champion thing, right, for Demetrius Andrade, and then beating David Benavidez, being that guy to beat Benavidez late in your career, and then if he ends up, this is speculative, ends up beating Canelo after that, then you've got a damn good argument for the Hall of Fame at that point. But a lot of work has to be done before we get there. He's got to handle business against David Benavidez, and that is going to be one hell of a task. And by the way, the WBC, I believe a couple months ago, this is just before the Canelo versus Jermell Charlo fight, I believe the WBC basically mandated that Canelo defend his WBC mandatory obligation, which as it stands is David Benavidez, by April of next year. I'm sure that if they secure a May date for Cinco de Mayo, that the WBC would stand down and give their blessing on that. But all that to say, it sounds like Canelo, if he's going to defend his WBC title, is going to be doing that in May against, if the WBC is going to be a part of this, against his WBC mandatory, right? Because Canelo's got a couple mandatories, a few, being that he's got all the belts at 168. But if Andrade spoils the party and becomes Canelo's WBC mandatory, Canelo's going to have some decisions to make, because similar to Canelo not seeming like he's been interested in fighting David Benavidez, he also doesn't seem like he's been interested in fighting Demetrius Andrade, to where, remember when Andrade showed up in like the press conferences after the fight against like Billy Joe Saunders? Like, Demetrius Andrade's been campaigning to fight a lot of guys. Triple G, Canelo, Jermall Charlo, Jaime Munguia, among others. Like, he's been trying to get guys in the ring with him. But yeah, like, man, like, I'm just glad that a fight of this magnitude, David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade, is taking place. And this just pretty much caps off an extraordinary, historic year in terms of the fights that we were given, the matchups that we were given throughout 2023. This is one of those that just caps that off. But yeah, let me know what your early thoughts are on David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. Man, I know that this is an early thoughts vid, and it almost sounds like this is a full damn preview. I thought a lot about this fight, obviously, but yeah, let me know what your early thoughts are on Benavidez versus Andrade in the comments. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.